The Process, a podcast about creativity and experimental music. In the world of experimental music, outcomes and accolades for creators can be uncertain and at times seem far and few between. Therefore, creators and practitioners of experimental music must embrace the one thing they will always have complete control over: the process. This podcast aims to understand this creative process by listening to new works and discussing them with their creators. Each episode focuses on one creator and their music. Understanding how and why they create can inform aspiring creatives and help audiences better understand and navigate experimental music. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and I'll be your host as we explore the world of experimental music, creativity, and the human need to find purpose in their world and lives. This is The Process. The music of Curtis K Hughes is characterized by its rhythmic relentlessness, its harmonic adventurousness, and its often volatile mix of diverse stylistic elements and political subtexts. It has also been described as fiery in the New York Times and insidiously spiky in Fanfare magazine. As a Boston-based composer, Curtis has collaborated with many local organizations, including Guerrilla Opera, Transient Canvas, Boston Musica Viva, New Gallery Concert Series, Semiosis Quartet, and more. And his music has also been widely played internationally, from Los Angeles to Berlin. Recordings of his music on the Albany, New Focus AV, and Couchmere labels are available at all major online music retailers. These works include ones composed for the Firebird Ensemble, as well as the 2009 chamber opera Say It Ain't So, Joe, which centers on the 2008 vice presidential debate between Sarah Palin and Joe Biden. He has been on the composition faculty of the Boston Conservatory since 2008 and has served as composer in residence for the Radius Ensemble and Collage New Music.
I wish there was more consistency to how the creative process begins in general for me. It would certainly be a lot easier if I knew how to start a new piece. Usually a lot of brainstorming at the piano and on paper. I find that if I do just one, then I come up with certain kinds of ideas that are maybe too comfortable, and I need to mix it up in order to encounter ideas that seem fresh to me. I guess I would also say that one thing that's very consistent is that the process is very nonlinear for me.
Sure.
I always want to start by writing the beginning of a piece of music.
Right.
But what I first write is seldom the very beginning. Mm-hmm. In fact, I often don't know what order sort of musical events are going to happen in until quite far into the process. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of connect the dots. Here's a landmark, here's another landmark. Yeah. How am I musically going to make these things make sense together, or not make sense together in a way that's interesting and satisfying to me?
So if somebody said, a gun to your head, go compose something, would you reach for the piano first?
If under tight time constraints, yes. But I'm happy composing at a desk in total silence as well. But but there are different kinds of there's a different kind of energy I get from being at an instrument. I tend to think I write more rhythmically interesting music when I'm at an instrument.
So what's usually the impetus for writing something? What are the things that inspire you?
Often the specific people that I want to collaborate with, getting really fired up about the idea of working with somebody that either I've worked with before and I'm excited and about, some aspect of their musicality that maybe I can tap into that I haven't done before, or maybe somebody new and I'm trying to learn about them and trying to learn what music might be exciting for them to play. Other times, I just mess around at the piano all the time and throw ideas down on paper in a very, very haphazard way when something exciting comes up. And sometimes I never revisit that. Sometimes it might blossom into a composition later on.
So you said there's nonlinearity in at least the part that you're writing and where it will end up in the final piece. Is the time in which you compose, is that a very linear thing? Do you have a very specific time or times when you compose throughout the day? Are you that organized?
Okay. I would love to be, and under certain circumstances, I am. I've got that discipline. I can summon it when I'm under the gun, when I'm under deadline, and I need to. For me, it's been a 20-year roughly experiment with trying to balance teaching and family and composing, and I haven't yet really figured it out in a consistent way.
Sure.
So there's been a lot of continuous adjustment. When you have a tight turnaround and a deadline, sometimes that simplifies things, and then scheduling the day in a way that just guarantees that the music will get written is something that certainly has generated a lot of productivity for me over the years. But I prefer not to be under what feels like a stressful deadline.
Talking about a piece like Merger, can you tell us a little bit about the process specifically for creating Merger? How did it all begin? Who were the musicians involved? Sentinent Robots, I believe, is the group that it was written for. But
I should say it wasn't written for Sentinent Robots. Actually, it was written originally for my colleagues at Boston Conservatory, Rhonda Ryder and Andrew Mark. But Rhonda had an injury and couldn't play the piece. So it's actually been played by a number of different duos, but Ben and Bri, the members of Sentinent Robots, they are the musicians who have dwelt with the music the longest. They've performed it quite a number of times.
Did this start as a two-cello idea?
It did. So the piece is a real Frankenstein monster. It was originally a much shorter piece for two cellos that I wrote, I think, in 2005. It was a gift to two cellists that I knew. They never played it. I was then commissioned by Boston Conservatory and Berkeley to compose a piece celebrating the merger of the two institutions. And they were looking for pieces for two cellos. And first I said, well, this one's never been premiered. How about this? And I was told, no, it needs to be a brand new piece, and it can't be that old piece. So my solution, which they accepted, was to offer to withdraw the old piece sort of from my catalog and to basically cannibalize it and to make it into something new. Right away, I had these landmarks laid out for me, which were bits of the old piece that I was sort of put into place, and then the rest of composing the piece, which wound up being very, very time-consuming, much more time-consuming than it would have been if I'd started from scratch.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I was trying to reconnect with the composer I had been in 2005.
I see.
And the rest of the piece was really connecting the dots. So I'm glad if you have that sense when you're listening to the piece that somehow, even from the beginning, the music knows where it's headed in a certain way, or at least it has some sense of implied direction about it from the beginning. A lot of stop and start, but certainly there's momentum as well.
What was the subtext then of this idea and this thought? What was the narrative of the merger in this piece and its relationship to the subject matter?
Well, technically, there's a thing that I tried to implement in the piece that was very specific, which was that I had a sort of a structural polyrhythm going the whole time.
Sure.
A collection of different but close speeds, sort of closely related speeds between the two cellos. It's sort of outlined at the very beginning of the piece,
right,
and then it sort of disappears into the background a lot of the time. Almost as though these are two independent mechanisms that are calibrated very, very differently, and yet they're playing at the same time, and they have to find convergence. They have to find a way to synchronize or agree or, come into harmony, which is not an easy thing to do. And so the piece is, one version of the narrative of the piece is that it's about that struggle, which in a way is a very mechanical thing, but also potentially a very emotionally fraught thing. There's some beauty and there's some pain in there. And maybe a little bit of a hint at the end that it's not a complete merger.
But there are these really fantastic arrival points within the piece. There's pauses, as you mentioned, but these sort of double stop sections where those get more and more sort of robust as the piece goes on.
That's great to hear. Such a close listening. I'm glad you picked up on all of that.
Well, that's what if another composer listens to your music, that's, yeah. I just didn't say it. You're dealing with some interesting sonorities there, right? Yeah.
Most of the time, I can't get very far with composing a piece of music if I'm not thinking about the people that are going to play it.
Sure.
And I really, I'll draw. I can't draw, but I'll draw a little picture of people playing their instruments,
Sure.
and I'll look at that while I'm composing, and I'm actually, I'm really thinking about their physical actions and thinking about who they are and what excites them to play. And that's, a big spur to my creativity. But I'm also thinking about who's going to be listening and what might their experience be. And I vacillate constantly between different versions of trying to over analyze what I think the listener's experience might be.
Sure.
And imagining that I can predict that more than I actually can.
Yep.
And then also sort of getting really hopeful about the idea that, okay, that's going to be a much more wide-ranging and unpredictable thing. Both of those things are exciting to me, but I am, like many composers, something of a control freak. So I like to kid myself that I can predict that better than I can.
So that's a big part. So do you find yourself, though, however, when you are writing for a specific instrument, or even in this case, as you were mentioning, specific instrumentalists, so not just, a bassoon player, but this specific bassoon player, do you find that sometimes limiting, that it is this person or it is this instrument? Do you ever feel encumbered by that?
Occasionally, I think one of the reasons I feel less and less encumbered by that sort of thing through experience is that there have been so many occasions where I've written with somebody very specific in mind, and that has not wound up being the person or people who actually champion the piece.
Yeah.
And so it's somebody else's take on it that winds up being the most meaningful to me, just often for logistical reasons. And what I really find is that having had a person in mind doesn't mean that I'm limiting it to that person. I know composers who certainly work so closely with a performer that they zero in on the extended techniques that a particular performer is really, really accomplished with,
Sure.
and really, really tailoring a piece to an individual's unique skills and peculiarities.
Right.
I don't actually do that very much. I'm much more thinking in a sort of vague, abstract sense about the person, so that I'm surprised to hear another person's, investing it with their own personality in a good way. So it doesn't feel like a trap.
And what is that take? You say, another musician may have a different take. Is that something where they're just not playing the rhythms you wrote, or is it a stylistic thing?
Usually it doesn't have to do with accuracy or inaccuracy. Although I am very interested in notating rhythms that sometimes look a little complicated on the page, but should sound very spontaneous. And so sometimes a performer will pick up on that and sort of immediately intuit what level of flexibility they've got in interpreting the rhythm. And that's a magical thing when that happens.
Sure.
But also, I like being very precise with notation. I don't think I'm a micromanager, but I like to put in a lot of dynamic and articulation markings. And one of the things I like about them is that, unlike notes and rhythms, they're not very objective. People really don't generally understand or agree upon what a tenuto mark is, for instance.
Sure. Sure.
What it does mean is that they'll differentiate. If there are a lot of markings in a score, people will do a lot of things and make a lot of nuanced changes and distinctions between different notes. And even if those aren't exactly what I imagined they would be, it's my markings on the page are helping to make that happen. And yet I'm being surprised, and that's a really good feeling.
So do you think that it's more often than not, is that part of maybe your creative process, is to have something performed and have interpretation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if a piece is any good until it's been performed a couple of times. Sure. At least,
Sure.
There are pieces I've written that I have dismissed as, failures essentially until the music has found its way into the right hands. So
what's a strategy that you've done to make sure that you're allowing that to be part of your process?
Well, for me, it was very difficult to get to the point where that became a healthy and reliable part of my process, simply because I'm quite an introvert and
Sure.
I take a long time to get to know people. It took me a long time professionally to build strong enough relationships with people where I actually was being sort of fed creatively by those relationships and not just sort of imagining them.
And it can be very transactional too. It can be, write us a piece, here's your piece, there's the piece, you played it, great, thank you. And then return to the tower, the composition tower, right?
Right.
So how do you navigate that?
You do have to fight that tendency in yourself to just sort of isolate yourself from the rest of the world, I think, at times as a composer. I think being an introvert can be a really great thing for a composer. But for me, the solution is really simple, although it's not one that we can turn to right now, which is I just go to a lot of concerts.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't even wind up striking up conversations with people at concerts. Yeah. But you see people, you come to recognize people come to recognize you at concerts. In a way, a lot of the concert scene is a perfect social outlet for an introvert because you've got a format that sort of is recognizable. And concerts that, of course, are creative with format and break from sort of classical music norms can be really wonderful for that too. But that's the best thing that I've done to build relationships with people that inspire me as a composer is just a lot of concert going. So I'm starving right now.
So let's talk about the word day job. And so this is Creative Cogitation 4.6. Do you believe a day job is helpful or hurtful to creator?
I think that you're asking about how non-composition work fits into the life of a composer. The answer to me is that it has to, one way or another. You can't compose all the time.
Sure.
I guess the two categories of day job, maybe. One would be, a non-music day job, something that, uses a completely different part of your brain and your body, and then a job in music. And I've had both. It really, really varies according to the person. I learned early on myself that working a completely non-music related job that was demanding left me feeling uninspired and not able to compose in a happy way.
Yeah.
Whereas teaching music inspires me a great deal, even as it exhausts me.
Yeah.
I really take a lot of inspiration from my students and have over the years. But at the same time, you've got all these other people's music in your head. Sometimes it's very hard to purge that and to actually get something done. So it's a help and a hurt. If I could have a day job, it would be if it were viable to pay the bills, something like stacking wood. Like something that just enabled my mind to wander.
Sure, yeah,
and then that would be great. If we don't consider teaching music to be a day job in that sense, it's very inspiring. I spend a lot of time feeling really thrilled after lessons with students. About how I recognize the struggles that they may be going through, or I recognize the differences and find those intriguing as well.
Curtis, thanks so much for taking the time to share your music with us and your opinions. So is there a way for people to find out more about your music and what you do?
Yes, absolutely. If the goal is simply to listen, there are recordings available on all major music streaming services. Of course, you can buy a CD. That's an option as well. My CDs are on sale at Amazon and CD Baby. Go to CD Baby first, but Apple Music and Spotify. One clearinghouse for all such information is my website. That's curtiskHughes.com. Have to have the middle initial in there so I don't get confused with the professional wrestler. But you can find links there to the music of mine that is available online, and information about upcoming concerts when upcoming concerts are a thing that happens again. The recording that you heard of Merger is going to be part of a forthcoming CD release. There will be eventually more news about that on the website. The CD will be called Tulpa, and you'll be able to hear that recording there in its entirety.
Thanks to composer Curtis K Hughes for his music, his time, and his insight into the creative process. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, leave a comment on your preferred podcasting app. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and this has been The Process.